I did not blink. I did not argue. My years of careful planning, my meticulous oversight, the countless details I had caught and corrected, vanished in the glare of Ariana's smile. Dad nodded at her announcements, applauding choices I had silently predicted would fail. Everyone saw her. No one saw me. I sipped my coffee, steady, letting their excitement fill the room. The building I had held together, beam by beam, calculation by calculation, was invisible to them, but I knew it would stand, if only because I refused to falter. It had always been this way. Growing up, I had carried the unseen burdens, solved the problems nobody else wanted to face, and absorbed the blame for mistakes that weren't mine. Competence had been my constant companion, patience my shield. And now, as I watched my labor applauded in absence, I felt a familiar calm settle in my chest. I had learned long ago that recognition is optional, control is everything. And in that quiet, calculated pause, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit. I was never the A, just the wall holding it up. The site was quiet when I arrived. Contractors were already moving materials, unaware that a miscalculation in the steel supports had been quietly corrected in yesterday's revisions. I walked past scaffolding and cranes, checking the alignment notes I had annotated in fine print. No one asked for confirmation, no one noticed the adjustments, but the building would stand because I had anticipated every flaw. Ariana arrived mid-morning, her phone lighting up with notifications. She called out instructions to workers, insisting on changes that violated the permit specifications. Dad watched from the corner, nodding, approving the modifications she had no authority to make. I did not confront her. I logged the deviations, photographed them, and documented the potential risks. My calm presence was my strategy. Panic would be visible, competence was invisible. By lunchtime, a supplier called to clarify a missing beam dimension. I resolved it without anyone noticing, redirecting a truck and recalculating the load tolerances. Ariana was still posting updates online, celebrating her progress. Dad praised her efficiency. I updated the official city portal with the corrected measurements and safety confirmations, leaving no room for excuses later. The system now had my signature, my oversight, and my leverage. During the afternoon meeting, a new contract amendment appeared on the table. The team assumed it was straightforward. I reviewed it silently, noting clauses that would expose the company to liability if executed as written. I made margin notes and scheduled follow-ups. My input was neither requested nor invited, but the consequences of ignoring it were mine alone to bear. By the time I left, I noticed subtle signs of overreach, workers implementing methods I had not approved, permits being interpreted loosely, shortcuts being celebrated as innovation. I stayed quiet, collecting evidence instead of outrage. Every unchecked decision, every corner cut, was now recorded. My invisibility had become leverage. As I walked to my car, I paused and glanced back at the skeletal structure rising above the site. The beams I had reinforced, the calculations I had double-checked, the contingencies I had built into the design, all of it depended on one fact. I had not yet withdrawn. And then it hit me, quietly but with clarity. I was being deliberately written out of every major decision, my authority ignored, my presence assumed. I held the key to the Feist domino, and they didn't know it yet. I opened the worn leather journal I kept tucked in my office drawer, the spine creased from years of careful entries. Every project, every permit, every unacknowledged problem had been meticulously logged. Receipts from contractors, invoices for materials, emails to city officials. I had kept them all. Each one a silent record of the work no one ever thanked me for. Flipping through the pages, memory surfaced. The weekend I rerouted plumbing after the subcontractor misread the blueprints, staying until midnight while the team left to celebrate a minor milestone. The time I personally reconciled the budget after a supplier underbilled us, absorbing the oversight without comment. The countless meetings I attended on behalf of the family firm, negotiating permits, ensuring compliance, smoothing over mistakes that could have escalated into lawsuits. Every detail documented, every action deliberate. Recognition had never been the goal, competence was. I traced a note I had scribbled 2 years ago. If this fails, it will be my liability, not theirs. That had been the summer Ariana announced a new approach to the office without consulting me. I had quietly reviewed the plans overnight, correcting structural flaws, documenting risks, and emailing city officials to prevent regulatory issues. The next morning, Dad praised her initiative, oblivious to the weeks of labor I had invested to make her look capable. The receipts told another story. Supplies I had purchased out of pocket to keep deadlines on track. Software subscriptions I personally funded for design simulations that everyone relied on. The journals contained annotated calculations, photos of corrected errors, and notes on contingency plans. Each entry reinforced the fact I was the backbone, the stabilizing force. Invisible, but essential. By late afternoon, I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair. The patterns were unmistakable. I had carried this weight quietly for years, bridging gaps others refused to see, and yet it was assumed I would always absorb the fallout. But awareness had its own power. I was no longer content with silent labor. I understood now the full extent of my leverage. I held years of documented proof, legal authority through permits, and operational knowledge that no one else could replicate. And in that quiet office, surrounded by the evidence of my sacrifices, a subtle but irreversible truth crystallized. I was a load-bearing wall of this family's empire, and every reckless decision they made relied on my tolerance. The question was no longer whether I would continue to support them. It was when I would let the first domino fall. The next morning, I updated my status on the city portal, officially noting my review of all ongoing projects. It was a small action, barely noticeable, a checkbox, a signature, but it shifted the balance of responsibility. The system now recognized me as the architect of record, but also highlighted that I was stepping back from daily oversight. Every subsequent misstep would automatically trigger alerts. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront anyone. Calm restraint had always been my tool. Ariana assumed my silence meant acquiescence. Dad interpreted my reduced involvement as a temporary lapse in attention. They were wrong on both counts. I observed, I documented, I waited. By mid-afternoon, the first anomalies appeared. Unlicensed subcontractors uploaded their work for inspection. Approvals were attempted without necessary permits. The portal flagged inconsistencies, sending automated notices to the construction bank and the city office. My withdrawal had activated a chain reaction no one had anticipated. Every corner cut, every shortcut, now carried systemic consequences. I visited the site quietly, walking past scaffolding and exposed beams. Ariana waved, oblivious to the alerts piling up in her inbox. Dad was on a call, attempting to reassure investors. I noted each unsafe modification, each procedural oversight, and filed it with precision. No one saw me, yet I held the leverage for the first domino. At the end of the day, I reviewed the automated reports. Stop work orders were queued, loan accelerations were flagged. Insurance notices had already begun. My absence had amplified the risks they had introduced. Calmly, methodically, I watched the system prepare to enforce itself. I closed my laptop and leaned back in the office chair. The quiet satisfaction of control settled over me. No shouting, no pleading, no emotional confrontation. Just the certainty that every unchecked choice would now produce consequences, unavoidable and impartial. And then I realized, with a quiet thrill, the scope of what had begun. I held the trigger for the first domino. One small withdrawal, and every reckless decision would ripple outward. They thought they had power, but the rules, the contracts, and the system itself were now aligned on my side. They had no idea how quickly it would unravel. Ariana's confidence had grown unchecked. She brought in a new crew, unlicensed and inexperienced, convinced her social media updates alone would validate their work. Photos flooded the internet, smiling faces, progress shots, and hashtags celebrating speed over safety. Every post was a record, a timestamp, a self-incrimination waiting to be leveraged. I did not comment. I did not intervene. I noted every post, every deviation, every violation in my secure documentation. Dad, eager to show momentum, approved budget reallocations she suggested, ignoring standard procedures. Materials were ordered without permits, calculations ignored, and inspections skipped. Contractors whispered about inconsistencies, but no one dared challenge her authority. In the background, I observed, calmly cataloging errors, the data stacking like bricks against the wall of their overconfidence. The first structural risks became apparent that afternoon. Temporary supports were installed incorrectly. Load calculations had been modified without verification. A crane operator asked about a missing certification, and Ariana brushed it off with a smile. Dad, trusting her judgment, waved off concerns. Every corner cut, every procedure bypassed, was now a tangible liability. I reviewed the photos and emails, comparing them to city codes, permits, and my own records. Each misstep would trigger formal notices automatically. Every oversight was now documented, time-stamped, and legally relevant. My withdrawal had created the space for the system to detect violations, and they were walking straight into it. I walked past the site offices, clipboard in hand, observing quietly as Ariana boasted to investors about streamlined operations. The safety reports and alerts, however, were already queued in the system. The dominoes were set. My presence was invisible, but my leverage was absolute. One wrong move, one misjudged shortcut, and the chain reaction would accelerate. By evening, I saw it clearly. The structural risks, the legal violations, the financial exposure, they were mounting faster than they realized. Dad still believed he was in control. Ariana still believed she was invincible. And neither of them knew the rules I had aligned, the system I had engaged, or the consequences waiting quietly in the wings. The structural and legal risk was now visible to anyone paying attention, except them. The phone rang with automated alerts before I even arrived at the office. Stop work orders had been issued. The city had flagged the project for multiple violations, unlicensed labor, unapproved material changes, and improperly signed permits. The system was enforcing itself now. I sipped my coffee, reviewing the notifications with detached precision. No panic, no intervention, just the quiet unfolding of consequences. Banks called next. Loan accounts had been accelerated due to non-compliance reports and documentation inconsistencies. Requests for retroactive approvals were already on hold, contracts paused. Dad's voice cracked over the phone with feigned authority, attempting to reassure lenders, while I remained silent. My own notes cross-referenced, timestamps aligned, evidence irrefutable. Every procedural misstep they had made was now activated, cascading naturally through the legal and financial framework. Ariana continued her online updates, oblivious to the notices stacking in her inbox. Photos of the crew, the finished sections, and her cheerful commentary were now evidence of unlicensed work and procedural negligence. Social media had become a record of her mistakes, proof ready for regulators and insurers. My careful documentation ensured nothing could be dismissed or ignored. By mid-afternoon, insurance notices arrived, claims denied, coverage suspended pending investigation. Contractors called, confused and anxious. Investors asked for explanations, their voices tense but respectful. Dad began pacing, realizing the severity of what had begun. The system was impartial. The dominoes moved with precision, guided by the rules, contracts, and data I had curated. I watched from the corner office, calm, deliberate. The chaos was controlled. No one could argue with facts, numbers, and formal documentation. Each violation they had caused, each corner they had cut, was now producing measurable consequences, structural, legal, and financial. Their panic would not reverse what had been set in motion. Even as Dad started making desperate calls, attempting to patch approvals and retroactive permits, I allowed the alerts to continue. My withdrawal had initiated this cascade. My restraint had ensured that the system, not emotion, dictated the outcome. Every unchecked choice, every ignored procedure, now carried its own weight. And then I noticed it. The magnitude of the potential loss was fully visible to Dad, but still unseen by Ariana. The exposure was vast, cascading faster than either of them could manage. The project, their reputation, and their finances were all balanced on decisions they believed they controlled. And I held the calm at the center, knowing exactly how far the dominoes would fall. The first letters arrived mid-morning, certified notices, legal documents, and bank correspondences. Personal assets frozen. Insurance claims denied. Lawsuits filed. Each envelope contained facts, not pleas, each stamped with the authority of systems that could not be bribed, reasoned with, or ignored. I read each one calmly, noting timestamps and cross-referencing them with my own documentation. Dad called, his voice tight with panic. Zarya, we can fix this. Sign off retroactively, approve the permits. Anything. I didn't answer immediately. Every word he spoke was evidence of desperation. Every request was proof of liability, exposure, and overreach. I sat back, serene, letting the weight of the system carry the consequences he had always ignored. Ariana, meanwhile, had become frantic. Her social media posts now included apologies, promises to correct mistakes, and attempts to justify shortcuts. Each post only confirmed what the automated alerts and inspectors had already documented. Every corner cut, every shortcut, every unverified change she had made was now undeniable. I reviewed the sequence of events in my journal, the unchecked subcontractors, the misaligned beams, the permit violations, the budget diversions. Each item was meticulously recorded, timestamped, and legally binding. No emotional outburst, no public confrontation, only evidence. The law, contracts, and structural principles were impartial, and they were all aligned. Dad begged for retroactive approval. Ariana pleaded for guidance. I calmly laid out the facts. I cannot sign off on physics, I said. No emotion, no gloating, just truth. One slip in judgment, one corner cut, and the system enforces itself. Contracts, permits, city codes, insurance obligations, they do not bend for desperation. They do not negotiate with panic. They follow the rules, and they follow them precisely. As the afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, I could see the magnitude of what had been unleashed. Personal assets immobilized. Company credibility threatened. Legal exposure impossible to circumvent. The project teetered on the edge of ruin, entirely by the miscalculations and overconfidence of those who assumed I would always absorb the weight. I closed my laptop, satisfied with the precision of the cascade. No shouting, no confrontation, no personal satisfaction beyond the quiet certainty that the law, structure, and documentation were exacting their due. I had withdrawn. I had documented, and the rules could now act without interference. The morning was quiet, but the chaos was unmistakable. Work had halted across the site. Stop work orders, legal notices, and insurance flags had converged, and contractors refused to continue until compliance was verified. Equipment sat idle. Materials stacked in disarray. The project, once meticulously planned and maintained, had slowed to a standstill under the weight of the very oversights they had created. Ariana ran from office to office, phone pressed to her ear, attempting damage control. She called inspectors, subcontractors, and investors, her voice rising in ways she had never permitted herself in my presence. Every plea, every frantic attempt to justify her shortcuts only reinforced the evidence already compiled. I did not intervene. I simply observed, quietly noting each misstep, each overreaction, each panicked admission. Dad arrived mid-morning, carrying binders and spreadsheets, trying to reclaim control. But the approvals required were frozen, the banks unwilling to process requests without verified permits, the city unyielding in its enforcement. Every measure he attempted was blocked by the system, impartial and exacting, aligned perfectly with the documentation I had prepared over years. The magnitude of loss became apparent quickly. Financial exposure, legal liability, and regulatory violations all compounded, a cascade beyond anything Ariana or Dad could manage. The crew, unlicensed and inexperienced, had no authority to correct errors, materials remained misallocated, deadlines were impossible to meet. I walked through the site silently, clipboard in hand, observing the halted cranes, the empty scaffolding, the workers uncertain of next steps. Every structural flaw they had created was now evident. The dominoes I had set in motion had fully aligned. Every unchecked decision had consequences that were now visible, tangible, and unavoidable. Ariana collapsed into a chair in the corner office, phone still clutched in her hand, her energy drained by the realization that nothing she had done could undo the cascade. Dad stared at the site from the windows, spreadsheets forgotten, his authority evaporated. They had assumed I would absorb responsibility as I always had. But I had withdrawn. I had documented. I had let the system do its work. I closed my notebook, turning away from the office window. Calm, deliberate, precise. The collapse was complete. No shouting, no gloating, No dramatic confrontation. Just the finality of consequences fully realized, the structural and legal balance restored, not through force, but through rules, documentation, and restraint. The door closed behind me. Outside, the building waited, the weight of every decision pressing down. I observed quietly, and nothing more was needed. The office was empty when I returned for the first time in days. The building, halted and unfinished, stood as a testament to consequences, impartial and exacting. Contractors had packed up, permits remained unresolved, and the project files bore the full weight of documentation I had prepared. I walked slowly through the workspace, past desks littered with abandoned plans, and felt a rare, steady sense of release. I opened my journal, flipping past years of meticulous records, receipts, emails, blueprints, annotations, photographs. Each entry reminded me of nights spent rectifying others' oversights, weekends consumed by crisis management, and silent corrections no one ever acknowledged. 4 years, I had carried the load-bearing role of both family and firm, invisible yet indispensable. But the system had finally mirrored my patience, impartial, inevitable, unstoppable. My phone buzzed with messages, investors asking for status updates, lawyers requesting clarification, even Ariana reaching out with hesitant apologies. I read each one, noting their tone, their panic, their realization of magnitude, and then deleted them. I had no desire to intervene. The lesson had been delivered, the dominoes had fallen, and my part in it was complete. I checked my account. Funds I had long withheld for projects outside the family's reach were now accessible. I had arranged work with trusted clients and collaborators who valued competence, integrity, and clarity. No one assumed my labor would remain invisible here. The contrast was stark, but comforting. I made a note to organize a calm evening with colleagues who respected boundaries and contribution. For a moment, I paused at the window, looking at the skeletal structure of the project still standing. The weight of every decision, every corner cut, every ignored protocol pressed down visibly, yet I felt no resentment, no gloating. Physics, law, and contracts had done what I could not openly do, enforce impartial consequences. My restraint had been my strength, documentation my weapon, time and rules my allies. I deleted the last manipulative voicemail Ariana had left me, its edges softened by silence. There was no satisfaction in revenge, only closure. No one could argue. No one could twist facts. No one could claim ignorance. I had simply stepped back, allowed the system to act, and observed. As I packed my belongings to leave the office for the evening, a gentle calm settled over me. The quiet pleasure of freedom, of control restored to my own hands, was unlike anything I had experienced in years. The building would stand, altered, incomplete, reflecting the reckoning I had patiently orchestrated, but it was no longer mine to carry alone. I closed the door behind me, letting the sound echo softly through the empty halls. Outside, the city lights gleamed on steel and concrete. I walked slowly, deliberately, aware that every choice I had made, every step I had taken, had been aligned with patience, competence, and restraint. I stopped holding the roof up, and it fell exactly as it was built.